We're about to
Absolutely
go
great.
on YouTube too.
Excellent. We are live on YouTube, people. So that first question, how do you define AI ops? I'm going to be mean and ask Will to tell us all about it because I've learned a lot about Will recently and his relationship with AI ops. So Will, can you kick us off by telling us where this thing came from?
Okay, well, thank you, Helen, and hi to everyone out there. Yeah, I mean, AI ops originally emerged as a market that when I was working at Gartner, and I was covering the application performance monitoring market, in fact, had kind of discovered that about 10 years previously, realized that applications were evolving, infrastructure was evolving. I mean, basically, things were becoming a lot more complex, a lot more modular, a lot more distributed, a lot more dynamic. And the classical techniques of application performance monitoring were not, how shall I say, as effective, certainly on the newer applications and infrastructures as they had been historically. At the same time, what we were seeing was coming into the market, commercializing a new generation of AI technologies that were fundamentally based around kind of statistical learning, statistical pattern discovery. Neural networks were part of that, certainly. But there was a whole new wave of AI. The AI itself had been there for decades. I mean, there's very little new technology, but it was being commercialized and being commercialized cheaply at just about this time. And we saw on the part of users, particularly in large enterprises, that the IT estate was becoming so complex that it required some kind of cognitive boost, so to speak, in order to be dealt with effectively, and began to see vendors looking at this new style AI technology, this kind of statistical, mathematical AI technology, as opposed to the more kind of old-fashioned rule-based expert system style technology, and beginning to apply it to things like monitoring, and then extending from that to other areas of IT operations. So kind of seeing these trends happen, I began to write about this new market, and we eventually kind of looking around for words for it, we eventually decided to call it the Aiops market. And that word stuck as a way of describing vendors, like Moogsoft or Science Logic or kind of trends. There were many vendors at that point began to get into the market and self-describe their technologies, which typically involve the application of these kind of newly commercialized AI techniques to IT operations use cases. So that's how it all came about, and probably, really, how shall I say, kind of achieved self-consciousness, so to speak, around 2015, 2016. So that was the origin of the term.
Nice. Any questions from any of the team about anything that Will's just told us?
My mind just exploded.
Got some great tweets coming out of the team. So Biswar says AI ops uses artificial intelligence to enhance traditional IT and cloud native operations through data aggregation, automation, correlation, pattern recognition, orchestration, which is pretty close, I think, to what Will just said. Biswar, do you have
I think it's close. I mean, I just a quick point on that. I'm a firm believer that AI is as much about the architecture of the AI systems as it is about the algorithms being deployed. And it's like one of the things that we found certainly at Moogsoft, and I think just in general, that it's not just the kinds of algorithms that one applies to the data, right? It is the sequence of different types of algorithms, and how those, how those different types of algorithms relate to one another. So when I look at it, there are these kind of 5 elements that are really critical, I think, to any AI ops system. There's the data selection portion, because the data that we're dealing with coming from IT systems is incredibly noisy, incredibly redundant. And the first thing, before you do anything else, you need algorithms. They're going to cut away the noise. And then the next step is you need these kind of pattern discovery algorithms, algorithms that will kind of group related data items together. And that's the kind of thing you find in neural networks. Most of machine learning technology is actually this kind of pattern discovery technology. And there are other algorithms as well. But that's not enough, because then you need to go from these correlated patterns to some kind of causal picture of what's going on, because unless you understand the causality, then you can't do anything about it, right? And here's where this begins to intersect with some of the observability issues that we've talked about in other forums, because observability, at least originally, was all about finding a new way of monitoring data that would expose the causal nature of the underlying systems that you were monitoring. So these causal discovery algorithms are very important. Once you go there, then you want to be able to ensure that you can bring the right people together in order to, and the right, maybe even kind of robot agents as well, together to deal with any problems that have emerged. And then finally, there's the algorithms that are associated with the actual automation of the remediation. So I think when you're talking about AI ops as a discipline, and you're talking about it as a technology and even kind of a way of thinking about these things, it's not just one thing, and it's not just a collection of algorithms. As important as those algorithms are, it is those algorithms and how they're sequenced into an architecture, and it's as much the architecture that delivers that intelligence as it is the algorithms themselves. And now I'll shut up. I said my piece.
Nice.
Yeah, I kind
I
of
have a
tend
question.
to agree to that, because I think, yeah, so fully agree to that point of view, as well as we do little different as well. We go one step also, add the signal processing techniques from the patterns as well as the noise data, and how do you really do the left side of the brain to the right side of the brain, basically, right? So that's also one thing we do as part of the overall AI ML ops implementation. So basically, from the known unknown to unknown unknown is what is we kind of trying to focus on. Yeah.
So I have a question for Will, and I think it may be beneficial for the other audience who is listening us on live on YouTube. Is why AI ops? Why the artificial intelligence started with the ops? Why not any other stream of software development life cycle?
Well, I think it's a great question. I think that first of all, why applying AI to IT operations? Well, first of all, it was a complex problem, right? It was something that was crying out for a solution. That's number one. Number two, and this is interesting and probably not sufficiently appreciated, but there's always been kind of a subterranean relationship between the IT operations software market and AI, right? The IT operations software market first really came into existence in the early 1990s. And one of the reasons why it came into existence was because all of the AI researchers that were, there was an AI bubble in the late 1980s that was a result of, all the military investment in AI that took place, during the Reagan era and in the, era of first George Bush, right? There was a whole bunch of technology that was developed. Cambridge, Massachusetts was really kind of exploding with AI companies. And then it all crashed, right? Because the Cold War ended and the military stopped buying this stuff and stopped investing in these companies. And, and that little market bubble burst, right? But these individuals that had learned, how to program commercialized expert systems, the people that had kind of developed, began to commercialize kind of neural networks at that point in time, they were looking for a place to apply their technology, and they created the IT operations distributed software management market. So all of the early help desks, for example, the ancestors of ServiceNow and things like that were essentially expert systems, right? And and many of the event management systems that came into the market at that point in time were in fact originally like expert systems, right? So there's always been this kind of subterranean relationship. So it's only natural that when a new generation of AI began to be commercialized, or there was a new wave of commercialization, that it would find a natural home in IT operations. But all of that, the reason why this is all the case is because at the end of the day, even though IT systems are very, very complex, right? At the bottom, we're talking about what are fundamentally deterministic algorithms, right? We're talking about, at the end of the day, kind of machines that are following rules. So as complex as they can be, it's actually a very, very good test bed for AI that is looking for this complexity, looking through this complexity ultimately to find order, because we know, in a sense, that there is order, however deep, however hidden at the end of the day. Instead, when you try to apply AI to business, right, which is, of course, what a lot of people at least have been trying to do until now, and kind of looking at its potential for general business deployment, at the end of the day, you're dealing with kind of interactions among human beings. And yeah, I guess maybe some of us will believe that it's all deterministic anyway. I don't, but it's a reasonable opinion that one can have. But certainly trying to predict or see the patterns in human interaction, which is basically what a market is, right, is much more difficult ultimately than being able to figure out, well, what are the deterministic processes that, however complex, however hidden, machines are ultimately following, right? So that's why AI applied to ops has in fact been one of the more commercially successful forays of AI into the market during this round of commercialization of AI.
Yeah, I also want to add something here. I think where I am seeing the advancement towards AI and machine learning capabilities, and sometimes it is interchangeably used, which is not correct. But to a certain extent, the answer to Siddharth, your question depends on what is the business question you have in your organization, which you want the AI to answer. If you have the trust to answer the business question you have from a strategy perspective, or inception side, or design or development side, then it can produce value. But it has some prerequisites or precursors, like what kind of data you have to learn from. Do you have the right data set? And to best of my understanding and experience, I think we have a lot of data which we can work on from an operations perspective. So it's kind of probably it's an easier transition for us to kind of ensure that the business question which we are answering is from an operational point of view. And what I'm seeing is now people have started trusting machines to actually answer business question on the strategic side. So that's the reason why you see these discussions that in every board you will have an AI enabled bot. So these discussions have already started.
Gray, we've got 6 months of recorded Zoom meetings for business now. Maybe we need to feed those into the data for the AI and to see what happens, right?
Yes, and this is also related to the quality of data you would have and the business question you want to answer. And if the right ML algorithms are used to answer those business questions. So there's a lot of actually learning curve in terms of where we are today and how we deal with our data.
Okay.
I'm going to say I've got a handful of meetings I'd like to send the AI agent to instead of me to pick up the data and bring back the useful knowledge.
It's interesting what you're saying. I've been thinking a lot about humane technology, and in fact my talk that I recorded the day before yesterday for the SKILup Day on the 15th, so anybody listening to the live streaming, this CrowdChat is about the AI and MLOps skill update that's coming up next Thursday, the 15th of October. But yeah, I've been thinking a lot about humane technology, and it occurs to me that AIOps is a really great example of a very humane technology, because it's really helping us manage all of that data and work through it, and saving people time from toil and all of those horrible jobs that people don't like to do, and helping us get good customer experience. But it also encourages us to be humane. So it encourages us to look at our customer experience more closely and understand whether they're receiving the value that they want or not. And I'd quite like to kind of align that to a question that Niladri's put on the CrowdChat as well, which is, can we only use AI in operations? Even to make operations work better, we need to look at the holistic software life cycle. So Garima, what's AIOps' role across the software value stream, in your opinion? You're on mute, honey.
Yeah, now you can hear me, right?
Yeah.
Sorry about that. And in my view, actually, it depends on certain factors. How ready you, as an organization, you are to jump into the predictive and adaptive decision making. Are you at a stage in an organization where you are believing to take the experimentation and innovation as a center stage for everything? So these questions you have to answer, and there's a lot of maturity required in this journey. Of course, there will be people who will question that the AI capabilities are not there. They might also deny the fact that machines are trustable in that sense. But it's like, you know, the bigger question is where you start your journey from. So I would say, if you look at the AI capabilities, the first and the foremost step to this journey would be to assess your maturity level as an organization. Do you have the right set of data to rely on? And also upskilling of people, because before even starting those discussions, I think we need to have a people readiness to do this experiment and change. Probably that would be the first step in this journey. And where I come from, I come from a 5G progressive organization. I see a lot of discussion have already started in that direction.
Loving.
Anyone
Hi.
agrees to? But I have a different question. And maybe people correlate with any of the audience. Any of you think that AI ops and ML ops is, besides the technology stack, is creating confusions in the minds of people of moving to the next level? Instead, where the previous 10 levels to 20 levels has not been achieved by the organization.
I mean, I would say, I would say there's a couple of ways to look at it, in the sense that there is certainly a kind of business transformative, culture transformative aspect of AI, without a doubt. And I think that kind of, learning how to live with and learning how to kind of work, if you will, alongside of AI, will have a massive, massive transformative impact on businesses and on the way in which we work. And and as Helen is saying, this could go in a humane direction or not, right? And that's very much going to be up to all of us and all of our colleagues around the world as we work in this industry. I mean, there's another aspect to it, though, which is in some sense, a little bit more mechanistic that I think we need to be aware of. I mean, the adoption of AI, will not be, I don't think it's going to be a matter of choice, right? I think that what is happening, whether we will or not, is that the nature of business transactions, the speed with which business transactions take place, the rate at which markets change is accelerated to such a point that businesses will find they have no choice but to kind of rely on the AI, whether they trust it or not, right? Whether they're ready for it or not. It's just, you know, when we've used, and I think we might have even mentioned this before, you know, the analogy of, you know, kind of the automated trading floor, right? You know, businesses overall are becoming like the automated trading floor. And, you know, the algorithms trade just too rapidly for human beings to kind of get involved with them on a day-to-day basis. Now, certainly you want some kind of human oversight, just as you want some kind of human oversight to kind of automated trading interactions. But I think we're going to find increasingly that, you know, many business tasks, you know, will become such that, you know, they involve timescales, they involve the ability to kind of see patterns in data that are kind of just far beyond what we can do, you know, in a normal way. So, you know, the AI will come upon us whether we will or no. And that's why I think Helen's ethical questions are so fundamental here, because, you know, in some sense, we're already there, and we have to rapidly think through these ethical and cultural issues, because we're not going to have the leisure about it, you know, to deal with it, right? So that's what I think, you know, part of it's choice, but a lot of it is something that a lot of it is almost like a natural phenomenon that we're just going to have to learn how to deal with and deal with it ethically and effectively.
Any other concerns about the humane nature of AI from anyone?
I think Will mentioned a very important point. And I think we should emphasize this fact that we are reaching to a point where we'll see non-linear shift of consumer customer choices. And that will actually enforce us to move towards more AI-centric business, I would say, operations, because that is the only way possible. And I hate to say that, because a lot of people would think about it from different dimensions. And one dimension would be like how ethical we are in using the data, and how our e-privacy frameworks are different from each other. So we do not have a global e-privacy framework around data. We do not have a data usage policy which is globally governed. So if you think about AI in a larger context, these questions needs to be answered first. And this, I think, being a futuristic, I would like to imagine that we have a global data backbone, which is created by like digital giants. And how would we do that are bigger questions to answer. These like micro initiatives taken forward within the different organizations for AI will continue to grow until and unless we realize that, you know, solving the data ethical data challenges, the ethical challenges, the data usage policies, e-privacy framework, you know, policy and governance around data, that becomes the prime and the leading factor on how successful we will be in AI space. I think that's what I believe would happen in future.
Yeah, I certainly agree with Sharath here. So yeah, in fact, we are almost we are seeing, in fact, in our own organization, like use cases for AIOps. We are already doing some certain POCs to prove that, right? So I think we are at a stage that AIOps and machine learning ops, I think they are already knocking our door, and we are seeing a lot of advantages. In fact, there is a vendor that I've already talked to about AIOps, and they have actually showcased what the power of that is and what it will mean to us, to the business. So as we speak, in fact, I'm working on the use cases of AIOps. So I don't think this is actually going away, but yes, definitely we will be seeing the use cases of it very predominantly. I strongly believe that.
I have
Part of
a
that question, I was going to say, part of that question may become which company owns the data and who they own the data and how they sell it to, and how much of the data to use in training your own agent before you sell it to someone else, or whether you're even willing to sell it to someone else, versus building a model that can just incorporate someone else's data and sending it without having to give away the secret sauce that's in the model, right?
Right. And I think it is also a question of making it non-differential. So all organizations, all small, medium, large enterprises will have access to the same data. Because what we are seeing today is, big digital giants have access to more data. They can be more progressive in producing features, which are more custom, more adaptive, more, related closely to personalized needs of the consumer, which is giving them an undue advantage. And we want to break that. And how do you break that?
If the data is the most valuable point of that equation, why should you give it up for free?
Yeah, and that is something which I think is a question and a dialogue which we need to initiate. What is the data usage policy? What are our privacy governance frameworks? Do we have a global governance in that direction? And then we can actually neutralize all these effects of technology, which is changing how we live, right? So these are all good questions, I think, but we need to initiate this dialogue. And I think this CloudChat platform, which DevOps Institute is creating, gives a lot of opportunity to discuss these things from various global perspectives, right? I sit in Canada, so I have almost similar concerns, which probably you would have, right? So yeah, I see it from a different perspective.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, go ahead, Will.
No, I was just going to say that, one of the interesting things, about AI ops in particular, or the application of machine learning to ops in particular is, and one of the reasons why it's been a relatively successful submarket is because since it is dealing essentially with machine data most of the time, right? At least to date, we're dealing with the kinds of things that observability platforms are interested in. We're dealing with metrics, logs, traces, maybe events coming from the systems. In a way, although there are big data problems, right? This data, is, once again, really noisy. It's really redundant. There are all sorts of issues with it. We're kind of spared, some of these very, very important issues that you're bringing up around, kind of data where in some sense human beings are involved, or even business strategies are involved, right? Involved. We're talking about, is the server overloaded? Is there a delay on a particular network link? All super important questions to making sure a business happens or making sure that a government can function smoothly. No question about that. But the data itself is kind of less of an issue. And precisely because that data is less of an issue, those very significant concerns that have been brought up here don't apply directly. And I think that's one of the reasons why the AI ops software market, as opposed to kind of AI in general, has been allowed, has developed kind of as rapidly as it can. One of the things that I think is beginning to happen, and is something where it begins to pass into this area that you're just talking about, is that now AI ops, particularly as it kind of blends with observability, is kind of beginning to move into the SecOps space, right? So now it's starting to look at patterns that may not be caused because of system breakdown or kind of changes in usage pattern, but patterns that may be emerging because there's been some kind of malicious intervention, right? So suddenly human actions begin to play a role in what these AI ops systems are looking at now that they're being targeted in the security area. So I think that the AI ops world has kind of been innocent so far because the data that it's dealt with has not been really human data. It's been machine data. But now as it's beginning to creep into kind of security, those issues are beginning to come up. So it's just keep that in mind when, thinking about, well, why the AI ops companies kind of doing what they're doing, because they don't have some of these problems up until now. And I think that's beginning to change.
You know what? I can't hold myself. I actually agree with you, Will, what you have said, that the micro initiatives which we are seeing within organizations around AI in operational side of the business is due to the fact that we are dealing with machine data. The moment we actually start creating new services out of these new data which we have access to, and the moment we start creating new business models, this can become a problem, right?
Yeah.
So I guess we are at a stage where we are starting this journey, but looking ahead, and again, I'm a futuristic, I actually work in a strategy function. So I am dealing with these kind of questions day in and day out. And we are looking into like 2 to 5 years down the line, that what preparedness is needed for our business. So that is, I think this is where I think the conversations will begin, when you start leveraging that data for your advantage, for profitability.
Sure, I think also one of the use cases, right? And talking about the data, its criticality and how it is exposed, and the concerns around it, like even from a financial services, from a banking perspective, also, like as you see now, we have the open banking, right? So open banking initially, it was a closed a segment, but now all the banks are coming together, and there is a consortium to share data information, right? So again, with a policy of risk-based framework and things like that. So definitely, I think the market is changing, and the use cases, based on the use cases, I think data, even though it is a sensitive data, again, how we are exposing it based on, again, risk-based framework and things like that, I think the companies are willing to come forward and work together in a collaborative fashion. That's what I'm seeing happening in various sectors. Yeah.
Niladri, you've just put a question out there. Do you want to put that to the floor on Zoom as well?
Yeah, so my question that I put is, and on one side, I'm hearing that it's a great thing to be done and everybody's going to do it. And that's the only way to do things if we want to progress in life. On the other side, I see that there is so many challenges, so many different things, starting from an organization to even have the discipline enough to have the data on which AI and ML will work. There's a lot of garbage that is all over the place. So until unless we clean it, we cannot get anything out of it. And then, as Garima said, there's challenges of security and other things. So my question is that, does it really mean that AI is in theory as of now? It is really no implementation, no practice. We are talking about it from an expectation that it is going to be great. But are we really ready? Are organizations really ready to take it up to the extent that it has been hyped?
Well, I mean, I would disagree that we don't have AI now. I mean, I think we have AI in the sense that we have, algorithms that discover patterns in data that, that would not be discoverable by the human mind, algorithms that can, deal with the redundancy in data, algorithms that can have causal insight. So, I mean, I think that, AI is there. Now, I think you bring up a really important point, that there are expectations that have been built around AI, so that AI is almost like a mystical thing. In fact, you hear people seriously having these arguments about, have we achieved true AI yet, right? As if, it's going to kind of somehow sort of emerge when we get the formulas right, and kind of emerge in our systems. And I think that's the wrong way to look at AI. I mean, I think AI is definitely, it's characteristic of certain types of algorithms. I mean, AI algorithms are algorithms that kind of inherently can deal with kind of large data sets, that where the individual data items have multiple dimensions. And it's kind of like almost think of it as like an advance on traditional statistical techniques that, are able to deal with high dimensional data sets, very, very large rapidly changing data sets. And the reason why we call it AI is because the algorithms that we apply to these data sets and to this kind of data do resemble in some way or another the way in which the mind or the brain works with the data that it has to deal with, right? So I think that when we look at AI, we should look at it very soberly, right? We shouldn't expect it to be something that is going to come, that is going to be in some ways kind of significantly different from software that we've dealt with, until this point. It's in fact, once again, a fairly well-defined set of techniques for dealing with certain kinds of data sets. And in some sense, the fact that it's AI is almost an accidental consequence of its resemblance of the way in which the brain goes about processing data.
Right. And I want to add one more thing, because this topic is very close to my heart, but I don't want to hijack the conversation. One thing which I have seen from where my experience goes is it is an interdisciplinary skill. You would need a lot of interdisciplinary people to support your AI, whatever AI projects and whatever AI native products you're bringing onto the table. The second thing is it's a mathematical discipline as well. Like if you think about algorithms, the ML models, it is a lot of mathematical modeling involved in that. So you would need specialists in that area who will not only cleanse your data, but also require people who can adjust your ML models, machine learning models, according to the business question you have. So it is a huge undertaking for an organization to look at the upskilling challenge you have. And the third thing is answering the right business question with the balance you have to maintain today with the level of guidance we have around data usage policies, around the data which we have, where we will learn from. So I think these three aspects are important for any organization to do an assessment before even starting to think about a journey around AI native products.
You bring up a really interesting point there, Garima, and it begs a question from me when I heard a man by the name of Glenn O'Donnell say on the DevOps Enterprise Summit back in 2014, you need to be the automator, not the automated. And definitely was pointing to things like AI and machine learning with respect to software delivery. So I'm interested to hear from the group. Obviously, there's an organizational transformation that takes place in planning around AI and machine learning, but what skill sets are required to harness the power of AI and machine learning today, and how do we see that changing going forward?
Jeremy, I think you have to be careful, because part of it, and one of the reasons I was going to say back to Garima, is you can think that you have to have all the skills to write the algorithm and to produce your own algorithm, and you don't necessarily have to. You only have to have enough skills to use the tools. A lot of the vulnerability management we use today is an ML focused, and you only have to know enough to point the tool and turn the tool on. It gives you back all the results. You don't actually have to write the algorithm.
There's a lot of very sophisticated algorithms out there that can do some very detailed analytics, but the bulk of what we do today in terms of machine learning is very much like A/B, split your data set 1/3, 2/3, and cram a whole bunch of compute power at it. We're not doing as much in terms of the more intelligent type pieces necessarily, but you can start to derive and calculate all sorts of things just from that, just like Mark says. There's so much you can do today just by taking your data and firing it through an already pre-designed set of algorithms that will auto start to refine on the data and see what comes out the other end.
And I actually want to add something here, because I think it's also a strategic question for an organization. Do you go in a supervised learning direction or unsupervised learning direction? Do you actually have a clear view on what business question you are trying to answer. If I go back to the vulnerability management example, you have clear indications and clear use case around, you know, what business question you are solving. And then you can actually fill that gap with the data and the tool you have already in the system. But often what we see and what I see that the business question itself is not clear. The second part of the problem is, you know, when you actually start to kind of consider the data, you do not understand that how this data would be manipulated, cleansed in order to get you the right answers. And the third step is what algorithms would get you best predictions, best mechanism to adapt what you want to do. So there are 3 steps in this process, and all these 3 steps would need different skill sets.
Gotcha. No, really good. Interesting. Who, you know, I think again, it comes to a question too. You know, maybe it's not an ethics question, but you know, there's a lot that's already been done in the sense of creating algorithms. How are we cross-checking what's been done, and from that perspective? And do you see, you know, maybe this is a question for Will too, but do you see the creation of new algorithms happening more frequently now than maybe when the idea of AI and machine learning first started?
Well, I mean, I think, you know, this is a big issue. I mean, a fascinating issue. I mean, I think that, you know, there was certainly an explosion of kind of algorithmic creativity, like in the late 50s, you know, in the AI area. There was an explosion of algorithmic creativity, you know, then in the late 80s. I think that what we have seen, I would say over the last, you know, 5 to 7 years or so, you know, has been, you know, largely a commercialization of the intellectual breakthroughs that kind of took place earlier, because, you know, now, I mean, this is the oldest, you know, this has occurred in many other fields as well, that there is now kind of, you know, cheap compute capabilities, which made kind of, you know, the algorithms of the past seem impossible that now we can deploy relatively easily. So there's been a lot of effort, you know, over the last kind of 5 to 10 years, kind of take this sort of kind of, you know, intellectual heritage and actually deploying it. So, you know, once again, I mean, things like deep neural networks, you know, pretty old stuff, actually. You know, it's been around for quite a while. But, you know, what's new is the ability to kind of deploy it in a kind of economically reasonable way and in a time period, you know, and at a time scale which makes sense. I mean, there has been algorithmic creativity, but, you know, what we haven't seen, you know, in this round of commercialization are kind of like the massive paradigm shifts that we saw in the 50s and in the 80s. Now, I think there's a lot of interesting work being done right now in the academic world. There's a lot of interesting stuff around graph theory. There's a lot of interesting stuff about kind of genuine kind of predictive analytics. There's a lot of interesting stuff around kind of the mixture of kind of quantum mechanics and statistical analysis as well. And I think there's a lot of really interesting work going on now deep in academia that, you know, will probably make its way to the market, you know, sometime over the next 10 years. But a lot of the stuff we're seeing now, you know, is in fact the result of these kind of 2 great bursts of creativity in the late 50s and then again in the late 80s.
Hey, well, what about
Sorry
the
to
ability to
interrupt.
run the generative?
Sorry to interrupt. Okay, can we have our customary pick, which we do it every CrowdChat? I think we are about to finish the side talk. Others can also be on a video mode if possible. Victor, Sukumar, Reman, Puna, Viswajit and Radri. As much as possible, we'll quickly, you know, 15 seconds, and then you probably can go back on behind the screens. Cool. So just a second, I'll let you know when it is done. Should we raise our hands or something like this, or it's okay? Just a second, let me take a... Cool, thank you. You can go
Thanks,
back into the
Vidar.
shades.
You're always reliable for doing that. So Mark, you were going to say something, I think, to Will.
I was going to ask Will about possibilities of using the GANs, right? The generative adversarial networks as your AI ops, ML ops to compare, to show, comparable results to a customer and be able to say, look, you can put the tool on any of these things and do different things and you get the same results or similar results in a,
yeah,
a movie
absolutely.
fashion.
I mean, I think what you bring up, I mean, I think that, a big area of development, which we're really just kind of scratching the surface, is this kind of concept where you will have kind of multiple, think of them as agents, whatever, that are in fact competing kind of with algorithms, right? And I think that it will not only be, how shall I say, a question of showing which algorithms are the best for any given circumstance, right? But I think that the competition among algorithms themselves will drive results. So kind of if you think of, if you think of the market, right, any kind of market as an interaction among a lot of different players, which is ultimately a way of calculating a price, right? The price is a computation which is determining the relative scarcity of goods, right? Well, you can kind of imagine a future where many of the AI algorithms are in fact kind of market algorithms, which are kind of the result of the interaction of multiple algorithms coming from many different agents. So yes, absolutely. I think we'll see a lot of kind of competition among individual algorithms and even automated competition among individual algorithms in order to obtain the optimal result. And I think it's going to even go a step further, that competition will become incorporated into the algorithms themselves.
Right, and there is one more important aspect to this is when we apply algorithms, and I actually I am mentoring a cohort of applied data science in one of my other engagements. So where I see that it also a lot depends on the data choices you have and the type of data you have. Because it's not only the algorithms will produce results as good as the data you have. Right? So whether you apply a time series model or a Fourier series or ARIMA model, you can apply to any data, right? But if you do not massage the data, clean the data, you do not have the right tagging, right clustering of parameters, this competing scenario will build up, and then you will not have the best results. So I think the starting point, again, take a step back, work on the business question you have, and then prepare the data you need. And then the third step is to build an algorithm. And it's not one algorithm. You have to apply multiple algorithms to the same data set to understand which one works the best. And that is why you do machine learning training. You train the machine learning models on a set, and then you test it on another set, right? So this requires a lot of effort and a lot of diligence.
Mark's just put something interesting in chat about competition and pointing out the alpha dogfight trials with 8 AIs flying virtual F-16s in gun battles. So that sounds insane and really very expensive. What was the
They were virtual. So they were all virtual
okay,
F-16s,
yeah.
right? So they flew on the flight simulator. And then at the end of the week, they plugged in the human guy into his simulator against the top AI. And he lost spectacularly.
Oh dear, that's
awkward. But the U.S. Secretary of Defense committed to a live AI versus human pilot by the end of 2024.
That's just around
Both
the
flying
corner, really,
actual
isn't it?
planes.
If only we didn't need them, says her. Peace and love. Yeah. So I was gonna, this conversation's made me think of slightly different angles, different from AI ops, and thinking more about the dev side of AI. And I was wondering what people were thinking about people wanting to construct their own AI applications or to augment their applications with AI, and whether we're seeing like artifact repositories or libraries of algorithms for people to draw down from at the moment. What's happening in that space? Does anyone know?
I think ideally you'd want your AI to be like a child and give it libraries, right? Like they're trying to train the MATLAB or MATLAB tool, that you'd present it and say it has libraries of physics code and this, that it has the technical knowledge. Now feed it your data and see what happens.
Yeah, so there are libraries for those different models. Just if you go up into any one of the cloud vendors, you can select from the different types of models you want to try running against the data and see what the outputs look like. Then there's the artifacts of learning. Am I looking at local optimization, maximum, minima, looking at all the different pieces? How do I make judgment calls as to what type of algorithm to apply to what type of data? Am I looking for structured, unstructured information? Am I looking for categorization, recommendation engines? Depending on what I'm trying to do, kind of drives what that looks like. There's this concept of once you've found the models that you need, I can then store that model and say, hey, there's my model that I've created, this works. But I've also got to version the data to go with it, because of course, if the data changes and I train it against a different data set, I may end up with a different set of responses or results. So you got to keep both of these in sync and correlated to understand, hey, this model works against this data, and to get these outcomes, now does it continue to, as I validate? And then you get into these interesting pieces around how many times do I need to split my data set to be able to start to understand the outcomes better, all of these other wonderful things.
It also depends on, where you are from a maturity perspective in taking those recommendations. So once you have all the recommendations, the predictive recommendations, and it can be multiple choice, right? So now, do you want the machine to decide or human to decide? So what I have seen in most of the organizations today, that when an AI, not AI, the machine learning model bring up the recommendations, they do not rely on, machine capabilities to formalize what way forward or next step forward. So they rely on human intelligence to pick up what recommended way they would like to go. So that maturity level has not been reached, where you actually completely rely on a machine for your adaptive recommendation solutions, and you build that end to end. So I haven't seen that happening, at least from where I come from.
Yeah, and I would say, I'm sorry, but I wasn't on the camera before, by the way. I would say that for me, one of the important things is distinguishing between machine learning and deep learning, because in machine learning, you have a series of, let's say, expected outcomes based on the algorithm that you choose, because the algorithms themselves, they are not that complex inherently, right? So with this set of data, which algorithms you can use, and you will guess more or less, but it will go, of course, way faster than any human or any crunching that you do of the data. You will guess the outcome or the direction of the outcome, where with deep learning, you get into completely wild answers because of that training to execution switch that you have to keep doing in order to do that. I played around 10 years ago with deep learning with what is called the Cohonen irrational neural networks. And the answers of that were incredible, incredibly good and incredibly bad, but they were incredible.
So we've got about 4 minutes left. There's a question which is prediction time on Twitter. So what software delivery use cases do you see evolving with respect to implementing AI and machine learning? And Mark said, all the things. I was looking at a Forbes article earlier on in the week, which had 10 things as well, which was the top one was improving DevOps productivity by relying on AI and ML to auto suggest code segments or snippets in real time to accelerate development. I thought that was pretty interesting, and like looking into the repositories. Who's predicting what for AI and ML ops in 2021? What's going to be happening?
I would say personally that AI is one of those problems that you can throw an unlimited amount of computing resource to it, and the more compute you give it, the better results you get. So I would say the accuracy of the results itself will increment as, I would say, processors and everything else gets faster and you have more available computing on demand to be able to throw out the model.
I just want to add to, so we are tracking the weather, and with the help of AI and ML data, and the seeding season in different part of the world, and that's how we are tracking some of the data and the farming data, and that's how we are also bringing some of those data into our production, and that's how we are guiding the farmers with the timing. And so it's a huge project. So if one of you interested, I'll have to connect with. There's a huge project going on in the farming side of it, but it's an amazing concept that what PepsiCo is working on.
And from a prediction perspective, I think it's a two-way street. The question is how DevOps would help this AI native products and solutions. So I would say that you would see a lot of progressive features getting integrated into the DevOps tool chain based on how much aggressively we move forward for AI native products. Having said that, like data versioning, ML model repositories, some of these, and of course AI native products would need a different type of security solutions. So that can be some of these areas where DevOps can see progressive features. Now, when you talk about AI as such, like how AI would move forward, I agree with the view of Will that the commercialization has started to happen in the operational space, just because the regulatory guidelines are not that strict and stringent when it comes to extracting data from machines. So that will also, I think in another 2 years, that space will aggressively move forward. But you will also see a lot of progressive solutions around new opportunities and new business models when it comes to these AI native products. So these are the two things I think would define how we move forward in future.
So it's my favourite time of the crowd chat when we get to find out who the crowd captain is, and it's Mark Peters for the total of 30 votes. So congratulations, Mark. Jeremy, we need a way to get a crowd captain based on the voice activity now that we're doing live streaming as well.
Maybe AI can help us, right, Helen?
Maybe, yes.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it. It's always a pleasure. I always learn so much on these discussions, and really appreciate everyone's time and consideration. Hope you all can join us on the next SKILup Day on AI and ML Ops. And until then, have a great day and be well.
Wait, you said keystrokes and tweets. I'll take gift
I was
cards.
trying to get off there. My God, you caught me.
Thanks, everyone.
Look for something in your inbox soon.
Thanks all. See you next Thursday, if not before.
All right. Thank you. Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
Take care. Bye for now.
Bye.